Please be seated. That was 30 seconds. Silence. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? Silence. So though nothing is happening, so much is happening. So much kind of in our minds. So what's wrong? What's supposed to be happening? This sense of silence and oftentimes just kind of the awkwardness of it. So you know what it's like when you meet somebody that you really wanted to meet, or a stranger that you're curious about, and you fumble for words. This awkward silence. You try to rush in to fill the quiet because it doesn't feel right. This sense of everything being quiet doesn't mean that there's not a lot going on. There is a lot going on. It's because there is so much going on that we feel the need to somehow not listen, not attend to the myriad of voices that are happening. Questions about ourselves. Are we interesting? Are we doing the things that we're supposed to be doing? Am I overlooking something that everybody else is seeing? Or then for these longer periods of silence, the recurring thoughts about a pain, or something that we'd done that we wish we hadn't done, something someone else had done that we wish they hadn't done, and the question of what will we give voice to? Will we say anything at all? And so it's possible for people to go through long periods of, on the one hand, silence, while they're being actually victimized by others. And all the while, kind of a chatter, a clatter, a noise to cover over those voices that aren't being heard. So we've seen that in spades, haven't we? With the sexual misconduct crisis that's been going on within the Catholic Church and within the Episcopal Church and virtually every mainline denomination, within the Boy Scouts of America and schools and universities. These voices that have been victimized over a long period of time, and clatter, misdirection, to distract us from what really has happened. This misdirection of attention so that we don't hear those faint voices until the silence comes. And in the silence, finally, they are able to have their voice. And there are ears to hear. And suddenly, things change. Silence doesn't mean that nothing's going on. John Cage, the famous iconoclastic American composer, in 1953 became so frustrated with the shallowness of American music, he composed a piece that he called 433. And he performed it at a concert publicly. It can be played on any instrument, right? Because in 3 movements, it's just a series of rests. Not a note is played. It's called 433 because it lasts for 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. And the critics excoriated it. It's like, there's no musical talent. There's nothing that's displayed that shows that you're an accomplished musician. This is not up to the standards of our excellence. There is no sound to be heard. And he said, well, were you listening? There's the sound of the cab out on the street. There's the sound of the guy 3 aisles back who's coughing. There's the sound of your own heartbeat. And there's the sound of your own thoughts. Because things are silent, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. Scholars call this period of time between the ending of the last of the prophets who spoke, Prophet Malachi, the last of the books of the Old Testament, and the beginnings of the gospel, that span of 400 years. They call them the silent years. Silent because there were no prophets that were speaking. But does that mean nothing was happening? No, there was a lot that was happening. So back in the time of Malachi, there were the Persians who were the military dictators. The people of God were united. The temple was a small version of what it eventually became, but it stood. 400 years later, all kinds of things had happened. The people of God had factionalized, and so there were the Pharisees emerged, and the Sadducees, and the Herodians, and the Essene community from the Dead Sea Scrolls. All of these different parties and factions vying for who was going to be in control. The Persians were cast out. The Greeks then came, and they were cast out. And now there were the Romans, and to help them survive all of the multiple sackings of the temple, the institution of the synagogues that became kind of the local center of learning and community life for all of them. Lots of things had changed, but they call them the silent years. Silent because they hadn't heard the voice of God. But in silence happens growth. In silence happens growth. So Jesus points to the fig tree. And the fig tree appears to be dormant. And then you know that the summer is coming when it puts out its little tendrils and its branches soften. And these little buds of leaves begin to develop. And you know that the summer is coming. And with it, the sweet fruit of the figs. Growth happens in silence. The spiritual writers all say with a single voice that of all of the spiritual disciplines, the bedrock, the ones that matter the most are the disciplines of silence and solitude. Silence and solitude, because being alone in quiet is where we hear God's voice. Speak to us in the midst of the clamor of all of the other voices that are going on inside of us. These voices that tell us how guilty we are, or how deep the pain is, or how much we failed ourselves and the people who are close to us. These voices that haunt us and make us want to somehow distract ourselves and fill the void. It's no wonder that to stay alone in silence by yourself, it'd drive you crazy. If it weren't for another voice that brings to our guilt mercy, that brings to our pain healing, that brings to our despair hope and courage to face the challenges that await us. I don't know if you've ever been afraid of the silence. So I remember probably almost 20 years ago, dreading it. We had been following my mom. She had been diagnosed first with kidney cancer and bladder cancer, and it metastasized into bone cancer, which was very painful. And we followed her over months. She went through treatment after treatment, and then finally it was clear that none of the treatments were going to work. And so she came down to that last piece of her life. We were with her at Christmas time, and then as it got to be into the spring, I got the phone call that said that she probably was going to have about another week, 10 days. It turned out to be about a month. And so I got on a plane to fly to Michigan. And in that ride on the plane, there were moments of silence that I really didn't want. I'd have done anything, look at any magazine to distract myself, but the questions were just too big. And I just dreaded going. Not because I didn't love my mom, I loved my mom. We had a wonderful relationship, but the idea of being there with her at a time when she was going through such pain. And my brother and sister had been her primary caregivers. Hospice was involved, but they were the ones who were there. And when I finally arrived, it was clear they were just kind of haggard. And so it became my responsibility to stay with her, especially through the night. So I had a couch that was next to her hospital bed, and I'd sleep there. And the days were fine because there were lots of people who were distractions and lots of things going on, but it was night. It was at night that everything kind of came to the fore. So her pain, and so then the phone calls that I would make to the doctor or to a nurse to figure out how to handle the level of her medication so that she could be comfortable. And those times when she just couldn't sleep, and so then we would talk and do the things that were necessary to do. There were times when her catheter would become clogged, and I'd never had to do anything like that, especially with my mother. And so she coached me through how to unclog her catheter. There was a bonding time during that time of silence during the night. And so oftentimes I'd find a passage from the Bible to read, or we would pray together when she was in pain. We would tell stories and laugh about what it was like when we were growing up as kids. You know, it turned out for me that those nights that I had dreaded were times of tremendous intimacy and presence. And I learned, not from a book, and not because somebody else told me, but I learned that in the presence of a God who loves us, in the presence of our tender love for each other and our gentleness with each other, pain and death are no match. That we can have confidence that no matter what it is that we are facing, that we are more than equal to the task, and what will come out of it is a sense of depth and blessing and healing that we will take with us into eternity. Where I had dreaded the darkness and the silence, they had all of a sudden given me what was my greatest gift. We are entering into the season of Advent. The season of Advent is a season that has to do with preparation. It has to do with a call to the shadows and to the darkness and to silence. It's easy for us to want to kind of distract ourselves and put away all of the kind of heavy thoughts that are around us and listen, not listen to these inner voices that cry out for our attention, but the opportunity for blessing, to see God work and to hear his voice touching each of the pain points, each of the guilty points, each of the lonely points in our lives. That opportunity to see him work is in front of us. And it comes through our accepting this gift. John Cage, who I mentioned earlier, long after he was dead, in the year 2010 in Great Britain, there was a movement. Again, people were frustrated with the shallowness of all of the music that led up to Christmas in the season of Advent, and they were just wanting some sanity, some people to be able to reflect a little bit underneath all of the claptrap and clamor. And so there was a movement on Facebook to make John Cage's 433 the number one single hit. And they loved the idea that the radio stations would be forced to play 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence so that there could be sanity in the midst of it all. It didn't win the number one spot. It won the 21st spot. But the opportunity for us to make it the number one spot, to make it in the midst of the coronavirus, in the midst of all of the craziness of our lives, to allow silence to again come into our lives, to hear the still small voice of the Spirit speak to us and raise us up as people of courage and hope in a world that runs from it. So, welcome to the season of Advent. Welcome to this opportunity to have your soul touched. Welcome to this opportunity to be able to see the things that you dread be turned into your greatest joy. Amen.